meeting the woman's eyes with a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. My millionaire ex-husband's pregnant mistress bit my ear during a custody exchange. The nurse paused, pen hovering over the intake form. I'm sorry, what? You heard me correctly, Diane said, managing a bitter laugh. My name is Diane Martinez. I'm 42 years old, and today I learned that some people actually do bite when cornered. The hospital intercom crackled overhead with announcements about visiting hours and code blues, while Diane's phone buzzed incessantly on the plastic chair beside her. Richard Coleman, her ex-husband and tech millionaire, had been sending texts for the past hour. Each message was a variation of the same theme. Let me handle this. We need to talk. Think about the children. Her phone rang, and Maria's voice filled the small triage area through the speaker. Diane, are you okay? I'm driving over now. Do not sign anything Richard gives you. Do you hear me? I hear you, Diane said, wincing as she adjusted the ice pack. Maria, bring my insurance cards. They're in the kitchen drawer next to the stove. Already grabbed them. And Diane, we're filing a police report. The nurse looked up from her paperwork with raised eyebrows. Ma'am, if this was an assault, you really should consider… I know, Diane interrupted. Trust me, 6 months ago I never imagined I'd be sitting in an emergency room because someone bit me like a feral animal. But here we are. As the nurse continued her questions about allergies and medical history, Diane stared at her reflection in the small mirror mounted on the wall. The woman looking back at her seemed like a stranger exhausted, financially struggling, fighting for her children against a man with unlimited resources. This wasn't the life she'd planned when she married Richard Coleman 20 years ago. She thought about her twins, Sophia and Lucas, who were now with her sister Maria after witnessing their mother bleeding while their father worried about liability issues. At 8 years old, they were old enough to understand that something terrible had happened, but too young to comprehend the complex web of manipulation that had led to this moment. The emergency room doors whooshed open, and Richard strode in wearing his $1,000 suit, followed closely by a man in an equally expensive outfit who could only be his lawyer. They moved with the confidence of people accustomed to solving problems with money. Diane, Richard said, his voice carrying that familiar tone of concerned authority. Why didn't you call me immediately? I would have brought you to a private clinic. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Richard Coleman, 48 years old, tech entrepreneur worth millions, father of her children, and a man who genuinely believed that every problem could be solved with the right amount of money applied in the right place. Because, Richard, she said quietly, some things shouldn't be handled privately. Some things need to see the light of day. The lawyer stepped forward, extending his hand. Mrs. Martinez, I'm Jonathan Hayes. I represent Mr. Coleman in family matters. We'd like to discuss covering your medical expenses and ensuring this unfortunate incident doesn't escalate unnecessarily. Diane didn't take his hand. Unnecessarily? Your client's pregnant girlfriend bit my ear hard enough to require stitches. What part of that seems unnecessary to you? Amber is under tremendous stress, Richard said, sitting in the chair beside her without invitation. The pregnancy, the custody situation, your recent behavior. My recent behavior? Diane's voice rose, causing several other patients to look their way. Richard, your mistress answered the door wearing my designer robe and then physically attacked me when I questioned why my daughter supposedly needed an inhaler she's never required before. The nurse cleared her throat. I'm going to need you folks to keep your voices down. This is a medical facility. Jonathan leaned closer, lowering his voice. Mrs. Martinez, Amber was defending herself and her unborn child from what she perceived as an aggressive confrontation. Mr. Coleman is willing to handle all medical expenses and compensate you for your pain and suffering, provided we can resolve this matter quietly. Quietly, Diane repeated, testing the word. Like we resolved our divorce quietly, like we've handled custody quietly, like we've managed my financial dependence quietly for 20 years. Richard's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it reflexively, a habit that had driven Diane crazy throughout their marriage. Diane, I'm trying to help. You know I care about you and the children. Let me take care of this. The way you took care of our marriage, she asked. The way you took care of my career when you convinced me that traveling for work would be too hard on the kids. The way you're taking care of Amber now by setting her up in our old life. Maria burst through the emergency room doors, still wearing her nurse scrubs from her shift at the pediatric clinic. She took one look at Richard and Jonathan, then immediately moved to Diane's side. How bad is it? Maria asked, gently examining the bandaged ear. 7 stitches, Diane said. But I think my pride took more damage than my earlobe. Maria's eyes flashed as she turned to Richard. Really, your pregnant girlfriend bit my sister, and you brought a lawyer instead of an apology. Maria, we're trying to handle this responsibly, Richard said. Diane doesn't need the stress of police reports and legal proceedings. I can make sure she's taken care of. Taken care of, Maria repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. Like a pet or a problem to be managed. The doctor appeared, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and efficient movements. Mrs. Martinez, I'm Dr. Chen. Let's get you properly cleaned up and stitched. The good news is that ear injuries heal well, though you'll have a small scar. As Dr. Chen led Diane toward the treatment room, she heard Richard telling Jonathan, handle the billing, make sure there are no insurance complications, and call Dr. Phillips. I want a second opinion on the treatment. Diane stopped walking and turned around. Richard, stop! What? Stop trying to control this. Stop trying to manage me. Stop trying to buy your way out of the consequences of your choices. I'm trying to help our family, he said, and for a moment, his voice carried genuine confusion. We're not a family anymore, Diane said quietly. We haven't been for a long time. I just took too long to accept it. 3 hours earlier, Diane had been picking up her twins from Richard's penthouse, believing the worst part of her divorce was behind her. She'd been wrong about that, just as she'd been wrong about so many things. But sitting in that emergency room, ice pack pressed to her wounded ear, she realized something important. Being wrong about the past didn't mean she had to be wrong about the future. The difference was, this time she wasn't going to let her millionaire ex-husband buy her silence. The elevator music in Richard's luxury high-rise had always annoyed Diane, but today it felt like a soundtrack to her own diminished circumstances. The soft jazz melody that once represented sophisticated living now seemed to mock her as she rose toward the penthouse that had been her home for 15 years. Good afternoon, Mrs. Martinez, said James, the doorman who still used her married name despite her corrections. Beautiful day to see the children. Thank you, James, she replied, managing a smile. His kindness was genuine, even if the familiar greeting stung. 6 months after the divorce, she still felt like a visitor in the building where she'd once belonged. The elevator dinged at the 42nd floor, and Diane stepped into the marble foyer that led to what had been her home. Everything looked exactly the same: the imported Italian tiles, the custom lighting, the abstract art that Richard had purchased because his decorator insisted it was investment-worthy. Nothing had changed except her right to be there. She pressed the doorbell, a necessity that still felt surreal. The door opened to reveal Amber Wells, 26 years old, 7 months pregnant, and wearing Diane's cream-colored silk robe, the one she'd received as an anniversary gift from Richard 3 years ago. Hello, Diane, Amber said in her characteristic slow, breathy voice that seemed designed for yoga classes and meditation apps. Richard's in a conference call with Tokyo. The children are ready. Diane stared at the robe, memories flooding back of weekend mornings when she'd worn it while making breakfast for her family. Could you please not answer the door in my clothing? Amber's hand moved protectively to her rounded belly. Technically, it belongs to Richard now. Community property and all. He said I could use whatever makes me comfortable during my pregnancy. Where did you learn about community property law? Diane asked, stepping into the foyer. Prenatal yoga class. Richard's been very educational about our rights, Amber replied. He wants to make sure I understand how property division works in California. The sound of children's laughter echoed from the living room, and Diane's heart lifted despite the tension. Sophia and Lucas, her 8-year-old twins, came running toward her with the pure joy that made everything else worth enduring. "Mommy," Sophia launched herself into Diane's arms. "Look what Daddy bought Amber." Lucas tugged on Diane's hand, pulling her toward the window. "It's a white Tesla. Daddy says pregnant ladies need safe cars." Diane looked down at the parking garage 42 floors below, where a gleaming white Model S sat in the spot that had once held her own car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic with a broken air conditioner and a passenger door that stuck in humid weather. "That's very nice," Diane managed, her voice steady despite the bitter taste in her mouth. "Daddy says you could have a new car, too," Lucas added with the innocent honesty of childhood. "He says he worries about you driving that old one." Richard emerged from his home office, phone still pressed to his ear, gesturing apologetically. His hair was perfectly styled. His casual weekend outfit probably cost more than Diane spent on groceries in a month, and he moved with the confident energy of a man whose problems could be solved with money. "Yes, I understand the timeline concerns," he said into the phone, "but the server architecture needs to be foolproof before we launch in Asia. Revenue projections don't matter if the platform crashes on day one." He ended the call and smiled at Diane with the same charm that had attracted her in college. "Sorry about that. You know how these international deals or time zones don't respect family schedules." "Of course," Aunt Diane said. "Are the kids ready?" "Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something," Richard said, nodding toward Amber. "Could you give us a moment?" Amber drifted toward the kitchen, her movements deliberately graceful. "I'll make some of that herbal tea Dr. Martinez recommended for the baby's development." Richard waited until Amber was out of earshot, then moved closer to Diane. "You look tired. Are you eating enough?" "I'm fine, Richard, because I've been thinking about our arrangement. The kids need stability, and I hate seeing you struggle. What if I took care of a few things? Your car situation, for instance. And maybe we could adjust the custody schedule so you have more time to focus on getting back on your feet professionally." Diane studied his face, seeing the genuine concern mixed with something else, the satisfaction of someone solving problems through generosity. "What kind of adjustment?" "Nothing major. Maybe the kids could stay here during the week, and you'd have them on weekends. They'd be closer to their school. Amber could help with homework and activities, and you'd have more flexibility to rebuild your career." "You want to reduce my time with my children to weekends?" "I want to help everyone," Richard said. "Think about it, no more rushing around trying to get them to school from your apartment across town. No more worrying about after-school care on your marketing assistant salary. They'd have stability, you'd have freedom, and I'd have peace of mind knowing they're safe." The word safe hung in the air between them. Safe from what? From their mother who loved them but couldn't afford the lifestyle Richard provided, from a woman who'd chosen independence over financial security. "And all I have to do is agree to see my children 2 days a week." "It's not about agreeing to anything," Richard said, his voice taking on the patient tone he'd used throughout their marriage when explaining why his way was better. "It's about accepting help. You know I care about you, Diane. You know I want what's best for our family." Sophia appeared at her mother's side, holding a small pink inhaler. "Mommy, Amber says I forgot this." Diane looked at the inhaler, confused. "Sweetheart, you don't have asthma. Amber says I might be developing it," Sophia said. "She says sometimes kids don't show symptoms until they're older." "Since when does Amber make medical decisions for my daughter?" Diane asked, her voice sharpening. Richard stepped between them. "Let's not do this in front of the kids. Amber was just being cautious. Cautious about a medical condition my daughter doesn't have." Amber reappeared, moving with that same deliberate grace. "I didn't want to overstep, but Sophia was coughing last week when they were here. I thought it was better to be prepared." "What kind of cough?" Diane asked Sophia directly. "I don't remember coughing," Sophia said, looking confused. "Children don't always notice these things," Amber said. "My yoga instructor says environmental factors can trigger respiratory issues. This building has different air circulation than your apartment. The implications hit Diane like a physical blow. Different air circulation, better air circulation, cleaner air circulation, the kind that money could buy. We should go, Diane said, reaching for Lucas's hand. But Mommy, Lucas protested. Amber was going to show us the baby's room. Daddy had it painted with clouds and everything. Another time, sweetheart. Actually, Amber said, there's something else. Dr. Phillips, he's the pediatrician Richard found for me. He mentioned that children of divorce sometimes develop anxiety-related symptoms. The inhaler might help if Sophia has any breathing problems related to stress. Diane felt the walls closing in. Dr. Phillips, Richard's pediatrician, for Amber's baby, making recommendations about Diane's daughter, creating medical records that could be used to suggest Sophia needed more stable living arrangements. Come on, kids, Diane said. Let's go home. This is home too, Lucas said, and the innocent words cut deeper than any legal document. As they waited for the elevator, Richard followed them into the hallway. Diane, think about what I said, about the arrangements, about letting me help. The elevator doors opened, and Diane ushered the children inside. As the doors began to close, she looked at Richard, really looked at him, and saw clearly what she'd missed for 20 years. His help always came with conditions. His generosity always required surrender. His love always demanded control. Richard, she said as the doors closed between them, some things aren't for sale. But even as she said it, she wondered if she was strong enough to prove it. The children's laughter faded as they walked toward Diane's Honda in the parking garage, their footsteps echoing off concrete walls lined with luxury vehicles. Sophia and Lucas chattered about the baby's room, the Tesla, and weekend plans. Their voices a mixture of excitement and confusion that reflected the complexity of their divided lives. Mommy, why don't you live in the big house anymore? Lucas asked as Diane fumbled with her car keys, trying to unlock the passenger door that always stuck. Because sometimes grown-ups need different kinds of homes, Diane explained, finally getting the door open. Buckle up, sweetheart. But Daddy's house has a pool, Sophia pointed out, and Amber says when the baby comes, we'll be like a real family again. Diane's hands stilled on the steering wheel. You are a real family, both here and with Daddy. Different doesn't mean less real. The Honda's engine coughed before starting, a sound that seemed amplified in the garage full of silent luxury cars. As they drove through the exit, Diane noticed Richard's familiar figure in her rearview mirror, walking quickly toward them. She pulled over, rolling down her window as he approached. Diane, wait, he said, slightly out of breath. I want to clarify something about what I said upstairs. The kids are listening. Richard, kids, how about you play the quiet game for a few minutes? Richard suggested. Winner gets ice cream this weekend. Sophia and Lucas immediately fell silent, hands over their mouths, competitive siblings even in the midst of family drama. Richard leaned closer to the window. I'm not trying to take them away from you. I'm trying to help you get back on your feet. You know I've always supported your independence. Supported my independence? Diane kept her voice low but couldn't hide her disbelief. Richard, you convinced me to leave my marketing job when the kids were babies because your travel schedule was too demanding for me to work. Every time I tried to go back, you had a reason why it wasn't practical. That was different. We were building something together. You were building something. I was maintaining it. Richard glanced at the children, who were still playing their quiet game, then stepped closer. Look, I know the divorce settlement wasn't ideal for you. California law only goes so far when one spouse hasn't worked consistently, but I can fix that. New car, better apartment, maybe even seed money for you to start your own consulting business. In exchange for what? In exchange for letting me help our children have the best possible life, stability, resources, opportunities that they can't have with me, that they can have more easily with me supplementing what you provide. Richard's voice carried the patient certainty of someone accustomed to being right. Diane, your apartment is 400 square feet. The kids are sharing a pull-out couch. Sophia needs space to do her art projects. Lucas needs room for his soccer equipment. I'm not criticizing, I'm offering solutions. The words hit their target because they were true. Diane's studio apartment in Van Nuys was tiny, cramped, and nothing like the life her children had known. She'd been telling herself that love mattered more than space, that time together trumped material comfort, but hearing it laid out so starkly made her doubt her own choices. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. "Weekends with you, weekdays with me, better schools, after-school programs, tutoring if they need it? You'd have time to rebuild professionally without worrying about pickup schedules and homework supervision. Everyone wins. Except I lose 4 nights a week with my children. You gain the ability to provide for them long-term instead of struggling day to day." The quiet game had ended, and Lucas was humming softly while Sophia drew patterns on the fogged window. They looked content, unaware that their entire future was being negotiated in a parking garage. "I need to think about it," Diane said finally. "Of course, but Diane, don't let pride make this harder than it needs to be. Sometimes accepting help is the smartest thing you can do." As Richard walked back toward the building, Diane sat in her car watching him through the rearview mirror. He moved with the confidence of someone who just made a reasonable offer, someone who couldn't understand why anyone would choose struggle over security. She started the engine and pulled into traffic, heading toward her small apartment where 2 8-year-olds would spend the weekend sleeping on a pull-out couch, while their father's pregnant girlfriend occupied their former bedroom. "Mommy," Sophia said as they waited at a red light, "are you sad?" "Why do you ask?" "Sweetheart, you look like you do when you're paying bills." From the mouths of babes, Diane caught her daughter's eyes in the rearview mirror. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard decisions. But you know what? What are the most important things can't be bought or sold? Like how much I love you and Lucas?" "More than Daddy's money?" Lucas asked. "Money isn't love, buddy. Money is just money." "But money buys nice things," Sophia pointed out with 8-year-old logic. "It does. But the nicest things, hugs, bedtime stories, family game nights, those are free." As they drove through the city, Diane realized she was trying to convince herself as much as her children. Richard's offer was practical, generous even. The kids would have better schools, more space, more opportunities. All she had to do was accept that being their weekend mother was enough. All she had to do was admit that love wasn't enough to compete with a millionaire ex-husband's resources. All she had to do was let Richard buy custody the same way he'd bought everything else in their marriage. The traffic light turned green, and Diane drove toward home, carrying her children and her doubts toward an uncertain future. Back at the penthouse, what should have been a simple transition became the moment that changed everything. Diane had returned to retrieve Sophia's art portfolio, which had been forgotten in the rush to leave. The children waited in the car while she made what should have been a quick trip upstairs. She forgot her drawings for the school project, Diane explained to Amber, who answered the door looking slightly harassed. "Richard's back on his call," Amber said. "The portfolio is in Sophia's room." Diane walked through the apartment that had been her home, past furniture she'd chosen and artwork she'd selected, toward the bedroom that had belonged to her daughter. Everything felt familiar yet foreign, like visiting a museum of her former life. In Sophia's room, she found the portfolio on the desk next to a small pink inhaler, the same one from earlier. "Found what you need." Amber appeared in the doorway, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. "Yes, thank you." Diane picked up the portfolio, then paused. "Amber, about this inhaler. Sophia really doesn't have asthma. I've been her mother for 8 years and she's never had breathing problems." "Things change," Amber said. "Children develop conditions. Richard wants to be prepared." "Richard isn't a doctor." "No, but Dr. Phillips is. He's the one who suggested the inhaler after Richard described Sophia's symptoms." "What symptoms?" Diane's voice sharpened. "When did my daughter have symptoms that required medical consultation without my knowledge?" Amber's face flushed. "Last weekend when they were here, she was coughing during the night. Richard was concerned. And instead of calling me, you took her to a doctor. It wasn't like that. Dr. Phillips is my obstetrician. Richard mentioned it during my appointment, and Dr. Phillips said it sounded like environmental triggers. He wrote the prescription as a precaution. The room felt smaller suddenly. Diane realized she was looking at a carefully constructed narrative, Sophia's mysterious cough, the convenient doctor's visit, the inhaler that would create a medical record suggesting her daughter needed treatment available only in Richard's home. I want to see the medical record, Diane said. That's between Richard and Dr. Phillips. My daughter's medical care is between me and her doctor. I have joint custody, which means joint medical decision-making. Amber's breathing quickened slightly. You're being paranoid. Richard loves those children. He's trying to protect them. From what? From their mother. From instability, Amber said, her voice rising. From financial stress. From constantly moving between homes. From a mother who's too proud to accept help when her children need. Stop! Diane's voice was quiet but firm. You don't get to tell me what my children need. I live with them 4 days a week. I see how they talk about the differences between here and your apartment. I see how they worry about you. They worry about me. Sophia asked Richard if you have enough money for food. Lucas wanted to give you his allowance so you could fix your car. They're 8 years old, and they're trying to take care of their mother because their mother won't let their father help. Each word landed like a physical blow. Diane saw her children's kindness reflected back as evidence of her failure. Their love twisted into proof of her inadequacy. That's enough, Diane said, starting toward the door. Amber stepped sideways, not quite blocking the exit, but close enough to create a confrontation. They deserve better than this back and forth. They deserve stability. They deserve their mother. They deserve a mother who puts their needs first. Get out of my way. Richard could petition for full custody, Amber said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Dr. Phillips would testify about the respiratory issues. The school could document their stress levels. Your financial records speak for themselves. The threat hung in the air between them, spoken softly but unmistakably clear. Are you threatening me with my own children? I'm telling you what's going to happen if you keep fighting what's best for everyone. Diane stepped closer, and Amber's hand moved protectively to her belly again. What's best for everyone is that you stop pretending to be their mother. I care about them. You care about Richard. The children are just part of the package. That's not true. Then explain the inhaler. Explain taking my daughter to a doctor without telling me. Explain creating medical records that make me look negligent. You're being paranoid and hostile, Amber said, backing toward the wall. This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes Richard worry about your emotional stability. My emotional stability? Accusing people of conspiracies, getting angry over someone trying to help your children. Help them or replace me? The question seemed to snap something in Amber. She straightened, her yoga instructor calm dissolving into something sharper. Maybe that's what scares you most, that they might actually be happier here. The slap came without conscious thought, Diane's hand connecting with Amber's cheek in a sharp crack that seemed to echo in the small room. For a moment, both women stood frozen, shocked by the sudden violence. Then Amber lunged forward, her teeth finding Diane's earlobe and biting down hard enough to draw blood. Diane cried out, pulling away, her hand coming back red when she touched her ear. You bit me, Diane said, staring at the blood on her fingers. You hit me, Amber replied, cradling her cheek. They stood facing each other, two women who'd been circling each other for months, finally showing their true faces. The facade of civilized co-parenting had cracked, revealing the primitive emotions underneath. Richard appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of Diane's cry. He took in the scene, his pregnant girlfriend holding her face, his ex-wife bleeding from her ear, and immediately moved to Amber's side. What happened? He demanded. She hit me, Amber said, tears starting to flow. I was just talking to her about Sophia's inhaler, and she attacked me. That's not, Diane began. Are you okay? Richard asked Amber, completely focused on her. Is the baby okay? Should we call Dr. Phillips? I think so, Amber said. I'm having some cramping. The stress. Richard helped Amber to a chair, his hands gentle and protective. I'm calling an ambulance. Richard, Diane said. She bit me. Look at my ear. He glanced at her briefly, taking in the blood, but his attention remained on Amber. You hit a pregnant woman. Diane. What did you think would happen? I think I need stitches. I think you need to leave. Now. As Richard called 911, reporting a pregnant woman in distress after being assaulted, Diane realized she was calling her own emergency contact. She pressed the towel Richard had given her against her bleeding ear and listened to him describe his version of events to the dispatcher. My ex-wife struck my pregnant partner during a custody exchange, he said, his voice calm and authoritative. My partner is 26 weeks pregnant and experiencing cramping. Yes, we need immediate medical attention. The children watched their mother bleed while their father worried about liability. And in that moment, Diane understood that the battle for her family had been lost before she even knew it was being fought. Richard's money hadn't just bought silence. It had bought a narrative where she was the unstable ex-wife and Amber was the innocent victim. All that remained was making it official. The hospital discharge papers rustled in Diane's hands as she sat in her Honda outside the emergency room, trying to process what had just happened. 7 stitches, antibiotic cream, and a tetanus shot later. She was $4,000 poorer and no wiser about how to navigate the legal minefield that Richard had constructed around her children. The billing department needs to speak with you, the nurse had said, handing her a folder thick with forms and payment options. Your insurance requires a police report for assault-related injuries to be covered under your policy. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria. Kids are fine. Having dinner and homework time. How many stitches? Diane typed back, 7. Coming home soon. Another text appeared immediately. Police report. Diane stared at the question, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Filing a police report against a pregnant woman felt wrong, even if that pregnant woman had drawn blood. But not filing a report meant paying $4,000 she didn't have, money that would have covered 3 months of groceries or her car insurance for the rest of the year. Her phone rang, and an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. Mrs. Martinez, this is Jennifer Kim from Pacific Healthcare Billing. I'm calling about your emergency room visit today. I just left the hospital 20 minutes ago. Yes, ma'am. I wanted to discuss your payment options before you leave the premises. Without insurance coverage, your total comes to $4,237. We accept payment plans, but we do require a down payment of at least 50%. 50%? That's over $2,000. I understand that's significant. However, if you have documentation that this was an assault, specifically a police report, your insurance would cover the entire amount minus your standard copay. Diane looked at the police station across the street from the hospital, its brick facade solid and intimidating in the afternoon sun. How long do I have to file a report? For insurance purposes, within 72 hours of the incident. But Mrs. Martinez, the sooner you file, the better for your claim. The call ended, and Diane sat in her car, staring at the building where she could solve her immediate financial problem by swearing out a complaint against Richard's pregnant girlfriend. The irony wasn't lost on her. She needed to involve the police to avoid being financially destroyed by the consequences of someone else's violence. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was Richard. We need to talk. She ignored it and called Maria instead. How bad is it financially? Maria asked without preamble. Over $4,000 if I don't file a police report. Then file the damn report. She's pregnant. Maria, 26 weeks pregnant. What if the stress affects the baby? What if not filing affects your ability to feed your children? Diane, you didn't bite anyone. You didn't create this situation. Stop making their problems your responsibility. Another text from Richard. I'll handle the medical bills. We don't need police involvement. Think about the children. Diane read the message twice. recognizing the familiar pattern. Richard's solution to every problem was the same: write a check and maintain control. Pay the bills. Own the outcome. Buy the silence. Secure the narrative. She thought about Amber's words in Sophia's bedroom. Richard could petition for full custody. The threat had been delivered softly, almost conversationally, but it carried the weight of inevitability. How long before that petition mentioned Diane's history of violence against pregnant women? How long before Richard's version of events became the official record? Her phone rang again. This time, she answered. "Hello, Richard. Thank God you picked up. How many stitches?" 7. "I'm sorry this happened. Amber is devastated. She's never been in a physical altercation before. The pregnancy hormones, the stress of the custody situation, she's not herself." "How is the baby?" "Fine, thankfully. Dr. Phillips examined her, and everything looks normal. But Diane, we need to handle this properly. For everyone's sake." "What does handling it properly mean to you?" "It means I pay your medical bills. We all agree this was an unfortunate misunderstanding between two stressed women, and we move forward focused on what's best for Sophia and Lucas. And in exchange, we avoid involving law enforcement in a family matter. The children don't need their mother's name in police reports. You don't need the financial burden of emergency room costs." Diane closed her eyes, feeling the weight of practical reality pressing against her principles. $4,000 would devastate her budget for months. Richard's offer would solve the immediate problem and allow her to avoid criminalizing a pregnant woman. "Let me think about it," she said. "Don't think too long. These situations get more complicated the longer they sit unresolved." After he hung up, Diane sat in the parking lot watching people enter and exit the police station. Some looked determined, others defeated. All of them were dealing with situations that required official intervention, problems that couldn't be solved with private negotiations. She thought about Sophia asking if she was sad, about Lucas wanting to give her his allowance, about her children watching her struggle while their father offered easy solutions that always came with hidden costs. Maria had been right about one thing: she didn't create this situation, but she was the only one who could decide how it ended. Diane started her car and drove across the street to the police station, carrying the hospital discharge papers and Richard's text messages, ready to learn whether justice could compete with a millionaire ex-husband's checkbook. The fight for her children had officially begun. The police station smelled like industrial coffee and photocopier toner, a combination that would forever remind Diane of the moment she stopped accepting Richard's version of reality. Officer Patricia Santos, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and efficient movements, led Diane to a small interview room where she would officially document the assault. "Take me through what happened," Officer Santos said, settling into her chair with a notepad and digital recorder. As Diane recounted the events: the inhaler, the medical consultation without her knowledge, Amber's threats about custody, the physical altercation, she heard her own story as if for the first time. Spoken aloud to a neutral party, the pattern became clear: systematic undermining disguised as concern. "You mentioned the child's medical records," Officer Santos said. "Do you have copies of this doctor's consultation?" "No. I only learned about it today when I found the inhaler." "And your daughter has no history of respiratory issues?" "None. Her pediatric records are clear. Dr. Reyes has been her doctor since birth." Officer Santos made notes. "Mrs. Y. Martinez, I need to ask, had there been previous physical altercations between you and Ms. Wells?" "No, we've barely interacted. Richard usually handles the exchanges himself. But there had been tension about parenting decisions." Diane hesitated, then decided on complete honesty. "She's been making decisions about my children without consulting me. The inhaler was just the latest example." "What kind of decisions?" "School pickups, after-school activities, even what they eat. Small things that add up to her acting like their mother instead of their father's girlfriend." Officer Santos nodded. "That's helpful context. Now, about the assault itself, you struck Ms. Wells first." "Yes." The admission felt like swallowing glass. She told me my children might be happier without me, that Richard could petition for full custody. I lost my temper. And then she bit your ear, hard enough to require stitches. Self-defense becomes complicated when the initial aggressor seeks medical attention. Officer Santos explained gently. However, biting someone hard enough to require emergency room treatment exceeds reasonable self-defense. As Officer Santos completed the paperwork, Diane's phone buzzed constantly. Text after text from Richard, each one increasing in urgency. Diane, please call me. We can work this out privately. Think about how this affects the children. My lawyer says this could complicate custody arrangements. The last message made her blood run cold. She showed it to Officer Santos, who read it with professional interest. Implied threats about custody during an assault investigation aren't advisable, the officer said mildly. I'll include this in my report. 2 hours later, Diane emerged from the police station with a case number and the knowledge that she'd crossed a line from which there was no return. Richard's money might buy lawyers and narratives, but it couldn't buy her silence anymore. Her phone rang before she reached her car. Diane, what have you done? Richard's voice carried a mixture of disappointment and anger she recognized from their marriage. I filed a report about being assaulted. You've created a legal nightmare for everyone involved. Amber is beside herself. She's never been accused of anything like this. Maybe she shouldn't have bitten me. You hit her first, a pregnant woman. Do you understand how this looks? Diane got into her car, suddenly exhausted. How it looks to who? Richard. To the family court judge who'll decide custody. To the social workers who might investigate our living situations. To the lawyers who'll use this as evidence that you're unstable. Unstable. Violent toward pregnant women. Unable to handle stress appropriately. Putting your own need for revenge above what's best for the children. Each accusation landed with surgical precision, targeting her deepest fears about herself as a mother. Richard had always been skilled at finding emotional pressure points and applying just enough weight to create compliance. I protected myself from someone who was threatening my relationship with my children. You attacked someone who was trying to help our family. The word "our" hung between them, carrying 20 years of shared history and divergent interpretations of what family meant. Richard, Amber isn't family. She's your girlfriend who happens to be pregnant. She's going to be the mother of my child, the woman raising Sophia and Lucas 4 days a week. Like it or not, she's part of their lives now. Part of their lives, not their mother. The courts might see it differently, especially after today. The threat was delivered with Richard's characteristic calm, as if he were explaining market forces or technological trends rather than destroying her life. What does that mean? It means my lawyer is already drafting emergency custody modifications. It means we have documentation of you physically attacking a pregnant woman in front of the children's belongings. It means your financial instability combined with violent behavior creates a compelling case for supervised visitation. Diane's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel. You planned this. I planned nothing. You created this situation by refusing reasonable solutions and resorting to violence. I created nothing. You've been building a case against me for months. The inhaler, the doctor visits, the financial offers with strings attached. This was always your endgame. My endgame is stability for our children. Your endgame is control. The line went quiet for a moment. When Richard spoke again, his voice carried the patient tone of someone explaining reality to a confused child. Diane, I have unlimited resources for legal fees. I have documented evidence of your financial struggles. I have medical testimony about the children's needs. And now I have police reports about you assaulting pregnant women. What exactly do you think your endgame looks like? The question echoed in the silence after he hung up. Diane sat in the police station parking lot, holding her phone and staring at the building where she'd just learned that telling the truth wasn't enough to compete with a millionaire ex-husband's narrative. Her phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. She played it, expecting another message from Richard. Instead, she heard an unfamiliar woman's voice. Mrs. Martinez, this is Patricia Wong from the Legal Aid Society. I was at the courthouse today and overheard some conversations about your case. I specialize in family law situations where one party has significantly more resources than the other. If you're interested in leveling the playing field, please call me back. For the first time since leaving the emergency room, Diane smiled. The fight wasn't over yet. Patricia Wong's office occupied the third floor of a converted warehouse in downtown Los Angeles, far from the gleaming towers where Richard's lawyers practiced. The walls were lined with case files and family photos, creating an atmosphere of organized chaos that somehow felt more trustworthy than marble and mahogany. "Tell me about the inhaler," Patricia said, settling into her chair with a legal pad and the intense focus of someone accustomed to finding needles in legal haystacks. Diane explained the medical consultation that had happened without her knowledge, the prescription written by Amber's obstetrician for a child who'd never shown respiratory symptoms, and the convenient timing of Sophia's alleged cough. "Medical records are discoverable in custody cases," Patricia said, making notes. "If Dr. Phillips documented concerns about your daughter, we need to understand his relationship with your ex-husband." "What kind of relationship?" "Financial, primarily. How much money has Richard spent on Dr. Phillips's services? Are there any business connections? Does the doctor have a pattern of accommodating wealthy patients' requests?" Patricia's approach was methodical and refreshingly direct. She'd built her practice on cases where money tried to buy outcomes, and she'd learned to follow the financial trails that revealed true motivations. "I want to understand Richard's pattern of behavior," Patricia continued. "Has he used financial leverage to control other relationships?" "His first wife," Diane said immediately. "Sarah Coleman. The divorce was sealed, but she took his name back after the settlement. I always thought it was weird. Sealed divorces often protect more than privacy. They can hide patterns of financial coercion." Patricia added Sarah's name to her notes. "Anyone else? His business partner? Carlos Rivera. They had some kind of falling out 3 years ago. Carlos sold his shares in Richard's company for much less than they were worth. Voluntary sale or forced buyout. Richard said Carlos needed money quickly for family reasons, but Carlos stopped returning my calls after the sale went through." Patricia's eyes sharpened with professional interest. "Family reasons that required immediate cash often involve leverage pressure. I'll reach out to Mr. Rivera." Over the next week, Patricia's investigation revealed a pattern that stretched back decades. Richard's approach to conflict was consistent: identify financial vulnerabilities, offer generous solutions, and slowly increase the stakes until compliance became inevitable. Carlos Rivera agreed to meet them at a coffee shop in Pasadena, far from Richard's usual haunts. He was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who looked tired despite his success as an independent software consultant. "Richard offered to buy me out when I disagreed with the company's direction," Carlos explained, stirring his coffee with nervous energy. "He wanted to prioritize government contracts, and I thought we should focus on commercial clients." "That sounds like a normal business disagreement," Diane said. "It was, until I said no to his buyout offer. Then my payroll started being delayed. Client contracts I'd negotiated suddenly needed his approval. Access to company accounts became complicated." Patricia leaned forward. "How long did this go on?" 6 months. Long enough for my personal finances to become strained. I had 2 kids in college, a mortgage, elderly parents who needed care. Richard knew all of this because we'd been friends for 15 years. "So you sold?" "I sold for 30 cents on the dollar because I couldn't afford to fight anymore." Richard framed it as helping me through a difficult time, but he created the difficulty. The pattern was becoming clear. Richard's generosity was always preceded by manufactured crisis, and his solutions always required surrender of autonomy. "Did he do this to other people?" Diane asked. "His executive assistant before Amber? Jennifer something?" She questioned his expense reports, and suddenly her job performance became an issue. He offered to transfer her to another company, one where she'd make less money but avoid termination. She took the transfer, and Amber replaced her. Amber was hired as Jennifer's replacement. Yes, young, grateful for the opportunity. completely dependent on Richard for income and references. The investigation expanded to include Dr. Phillips, whose practice received substantial donations from Richard's charitable foundation. The pediatric clinic where Dr. Phillips worked had been struggling financially until Richard's foundation provided a grant specifically for innovative childhood wellness programs. It's not exactly quid pro quo, Patricia explained, but it creates an environment where accommodating Richard's requests feels like good business. They found similar patterns throughout Richard's life. The private school his children attended had received donations specifically for their scholarship fund. The family court mediator who'd handled their divorce settlement was part of a mediation firm that regularly received referrals from Richard's lawyers. He's not breaking laws, Patricia said. He's creating webs of financial obligation that make people feel grateful to help him. Including me, Diane realized. 20 years of him handling everything, taking care of problems, making sure I never had to worry about money. Until you wanted independence, until I wanted a divorce. Patricia's final discovery was the most revealing. Amber's yoga studio, the one she'd started with her own money, according to Richard, was actually funded through a business loan personally guaranteed by Richard. If the studio failed, Amber would owe him directly. She's not his girlfriend, Diane said, staring at the loan documents. She's his employee, with benefits that include housing and health care, but also complete financial dependence. And now she's pregnant, which makes leaving even more complicated. Diane thought about Amber's sharp words in Sophia's bedroom, the threats about custody and stability. Even Amber's aggression served Richard's purposes, creating a crisis that justified his intervention. He's not evil, Diane said quietly. He genuinely believes he's helping people, but his help always comes with conditions that ensure his control. The most effective manipulation often does feel like kindness, Patricia agreed. The question is, are you ready to break the pattern? Diane looked at the evidence spread across Patricia's desk: contracts and donations, loans and obligations, a carefully constructed web designed to make resistance financially impossible. For 20 years, she'd been caught in that web, accepting Richard's version of generosity without understanding its true cost. I'm ready, she said. For the first time since the divorce, Diane felt like she was playing the same game as her millionaire ex-husband. The rules were still rigged in his favor, but at least now she understood what the game actually was. The afternoon pickup at Westside Elementary had always been Diane's favorite part of the day. Watching Sophia and Lucas emerge from their classrooms with artwork and stories, their faces lighting up when they spotted her among the crowd of waiting parents. Today, however, the familiar routine became a battlefield. Richard's black Tesla pulled into the pickup zone just as Diane was walking toward the school entrance. Through the windshield, she could see Amber in the passenger seat, her pregnant silhouette unmistakable even at a distance. This was highly unusual. Richard typically kept his dating life separate from school functions, understanding the social dynamics of divorced parents in an affluent neighborhood. Diane called Janet Torres, the school secretary who'd become a friendly face over the past 3 years. Good timing. I wanted to talk to you about Sophia's art portfolio submission, but Diane's attention was fixed on Richard and Amber approaching the school doors, moving with the purposeful confidence of people on a mission. Mrs. Martinez, Richard called out, his voice carrying across the pickup area loud enough to draw attention from other parents. We need to discuss this afternoon's arrangements. Several mothers turned to watch, recognizing the dynamics of a custody dispute unfolding in real time. Diane felt heat rising in her cheeks as she realized they were about to have a very public conversation. The arrangements are that I pick up the children on Fridays, Diane said, keeping her voice level. There's been a change, Amber interjected, stepping forward with one hand resting protectively on her belly. The emergency custody hearing has been moved up. The children need to come with us today. What emergency custody hearing? Richard produced official-looking papers from his jacket. Filed this morning, given recent events, the court agreed to expedite the evaluation of living arrangements. Janet Torres moved closer, her expression shifting from friendly curiosity to professional concern. As a school employee, she'd witnessed these custody dramas before, but something about this confrontation felt different. "Mrs. Martinez," Janet said quietly, "would you like me to call the principal?" "That won't be necessary," Richard said smoothly. "This is a family matter being handled through proper legal channels." "Proper legal channels." Diane's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You filed emergency papers without notice. What's the supposed emergency?" "The emergency," Amber said, her voice carrying clearly across the pickup area, "is that some women use children to hurt their ex-husbands rather than accepting what's best for everyone involved." The comment landed like a slap. Several parents stopped their conversations to stare openly, recognizing the drama of a family disintegrating in public. Diane felt the weight of their attention, the mixture of sympathy and judgment that followed divorced mothers in communities like this. "That's enough," Diane said, stepping closer to Amber. "Is it?" Amber continued, her yoga instructor calm replaced by something sharper. "Because from where I stand, it looks like someone would rather see children suffer than admit they can't provide what their father can offer." "Ladies," Janet Torres intervened, moving between them with the authority of someone accustomed to managing conflict. "The children will be coming out any moment. Perhaps we could—" "The children are why we're here," Richard said. "They deserve stability, consistency, and parents who put their needs first." "Parents!" Diane turned on him, her voice shaking with anger. "Amber isn't their parent. She's your pregnant girlfriend who's been playing house with my children." "She's been caring for them," Richard replied. 4 days a week. She's been the one making sure they do homework, preparing healthy meals, driving them to activities. What have you been doing besides fighting what's best for them?" The accusation hung in the air, and Diane felt the eyes of every parent in the pickup area. She saw recognition in some faces, other divorced mothers, who understood the impossible position of competing with unlimited resources. But she also saw judgment, the quiet assessment of a woman who couldn't keep her family together. "I've been loving them," Diane said quietly. "Anne." "Love isn't enough," Amber said, and the words carried across the playground like a pronouncement. "Love doesn't pay for tutoring or sports equipment or college funds. Love doesn't provide stable housing or consistent schedules." "Love is everything," Diane replied, finding her voice. "Love is what they remember when they're grown. Love is what teaches them about authentic relationships versus financial arrangements." "Financial arrangements?" Richard's voice sharpened. "I'm trying to provide for my children's future while their mother wages war against anyone trying to help." "Help?" The word came out as a laugh. "Richard, you've been systematically undermining my relationship with my children for months. The medical consultations, the school communications, the financial pressure, this isn't help. It's a hostile takeover." Janet Torres checked her watch nervously. "The children are going to come out in about 5 minutes. Maybe we should—" "This is exactly the kind of behavior that makes me worry about the children's emotional well-being," Amber announced, her voice pitched to carry hostility, paranoia, public scenes. "Public scenes." Diane turned to face the gathered parents directly. "You want to talk about public scenes? Let's talk about how my ex-husband's pregnant girlfriend is using my children to secure her financial future. Let's talk about manufactured medical emergencies and custody threats designed to buy compliance." The crowd of parents shifted uncomfortably. Some began moving away, unwilling to be witnesses to such raw family drama. Others moved closer, drawn by the spectacle of privilege and desperation colliding. "That's not what's happening here," Richard said, his voice taking on the reasonable tone he used to diffuse business conflicts. "What's happening is that one parent is putting personal grievances above what's best for the children." "No," said a new voice. Carol Henderson, a divorced mother whose own custody battles were legendary in the school community, stepped forward. "What's happening is what happens to every woman who divorces money. The resources get used as weapons, and the children become proof of who's winning." "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation," Richard began. "I understand perfectly. Carol replied. I've been there. The generous offers that come with strings, the medical consultations that happen without input, the gradual erosion of parental authority disguised as concern for the children's welfare. Other mothers began murmuring agreement. Sarah Kim nodded and said, the birthday party invitations that go to Dad's house instead of Mom's, the school communications that somehow get routed to the parent with the better address, the way every financial struggle becomes evidence of unfitness, added Michelle Rodriguez, while every gift becomes proof of superior parenting. Diane felt something shift in the crowd's energy. What had started as judgment was becoming recognition. Mothers who'd fought similar battles seeing their own experiences reflected in this confrontation. The school doors opened, and children began streaming out. Sophia and Lucas appeared, their faces immediately shifting from excitement to confusion as they recognized the tension among the adults. Mommy. Sophia approached carefully, her 8-year-old instincts reading the emotional temperature of the group. It's okay, sweetheart, Diane said, immediately moving to her children. Why is everyone staring? Lucas asked, his voice small. Before Diane could answer, Amber spoke up, her voice carrying across the now quiet pickup area. Sometimes children have to watch their parents make difficult decisions about what's best for their future. Are you getting divorced again? Sophia asked, looking between her parents with the worry that children of divorce never quite lose. No, honey, Diane said. Daddy and I are just discussing some changes to our schedule. Changes that will give you more stability, Richard added, kneeling to Sophia's eye level. More time in the house with the pool, better schools, all the things you deserve. But what about Mommy? Lucas asked with devastating innocence. The question silenced the gathered crowd. In the end, despite all the legal maneuvering and financial leverage, it came down to 2 8-year-olds who just wanted both their parents to be happy. Mommy will still see you, Amber said before Diane could respond. Just not as much, because sometimes what children want and what they need are different things. Sophia looked up at Diane with eyes too wise for her age. Mommy, are you okay? And in that moment, with 30 parents watching and her children waiting for reassurance, Diane realized something important. This wasn't about winning or losing anymore. This was about what kind of woman she wanted her daughter to become, what kind of man she wanted her son to become, and what they would remember about the day their mother chose dignity over security. I'm perfect, wine, sweetheart, Diane said, taking both children's hands. And so are you. Come on, let's go home. As they walked toward her Honda, Diane heard Janet Torres speaking firmly to Richard. Mr. Coleman, I'll need to see official court orders before any changes to pickup arrangements. Until then, Mrs. Martinez has every right to collect her children. The crowd slowly dispersed, but Diane felt the weight of their attention and, surprisingly, their support. In trying to publicly humiliate her, Richard and Amber had accidentally revealed the tactics they'd been using privately. The other mothers had recognized the pattern because they'd lived it themselves. That afternoon, Richard's lawyer received videos from 12 different parents, all documenting the playground incident. The narrative Richard had tried to control was officially out of his hands. The tide was beginning to turn. Family Court Department 12 felt like a theater designed for human drama, with its wood-paneled walls and elevated judge's bench, creating an atmosphere of formal gravity. Diane sat beside Patricia Wong at the respondents' table, watching Richard and his legal team arrange their materials with the confidence of people accustomed to winning. Judge Helen Carter entered the courtroom with the no-nonsense bearing of someone who'd spent 20 years watching families dissolve and parents weaponize children. At 58, she'd heard every possible variation of custody disputes, but something about this case had caught her attention. This is an emergency hearing regarding petition number FL 2024-8847 Coleman versus Martinez, Judge Carter announced. Mr. Hayes, you filed for emergency modification of custody based on what exactly? Jonathan Hayes stood, his expensive suit and perfectly organized briefcase projecting competence and authority. Your Honor, we have documentation of Mrs. Martinez physically assaulting my client's pregnant partner during a custody exchange. This incident occurred in front of the children's belongings and created a dangerous environment for all parties involved. Mrs. Wong, Judge Carter turned to Patricia. How does your client respond to these allegations? Patricia stood with the measured confidence of someone who'd built her career on David and Goliath cases. Your Honor, my client filed a police report about being bitten hard enough to require 7 stitches during an altercation that began when she discovered her ex-husband had taken their daughter to a doctor without her knowledge or consent. Judge Carter's eyebrows rose slightly. Mr. Hayes, is it true that your client arranged medical consultations for the minor children without involving the custodial parent? Your Honor, Mr. Coleman was responding to health concerns that arose during his parenting time. Any parent would seek medical attention for a child showing respiratory symptoms. What kind of respiratory symptoms? Judge Carter asked. Richard stood at his lawyer's prompting. My daughter Sophia was coughing during the night. Given the air quality differences between our homes, I consulted with Dr. Phillips about possible environmental triggers. Air quality differences. Judge Carter's tone carried a hint of skepticism. My home has superior HEPA filtration systems and climate control. Mrs. Martinez lives in a studio apartment in Van Nuys with older ventilation systems. Judge Carter made notes, her expression unreadable. Mrs. Martinez, how do you respond to concerns about your daughter's respiratory health? Diane stood, her voice steady despite her nervousness. Your Honor, Sophia has never had breathing problems. Her pediatrician, Dr. Reyes, has no record of respiratory issues. I wasn't informed about this alleged coughing or the medical consultation that resulted in a prescription for a condition she doesn't have. Mr. Hayes, do you have medical records supporting the respiratory concerns? Jonathan shuffled through his papers. Dr. Phillips documented the consultation. Your Honor, I'd like to see those records, Judge Carter said, and I'd like to understand Dr. Phillips's relationship with your client. Patricia stood smoothly. Your Honor, if I may, we've prepared evidence regarding that relationship. The next hour revealed the careful construction of Richard's influence network. Dr. Phillips's practice had received over $200,000 in donations from Richard's foundation. The pediatric clinic where he worked had been struggling financially until Richard's targeted grants. The pattern of financial relationships extended throughout Richard's life, creating webs of obligation disguised as generosity. Mr. Coleman, Judge Carter addressed Richard directly, when your ex-wife needed transportation, you offered to purchase a vehicle but maintain the title in your name. I was protecting the asset while helping her mobility needs. When she expressed interest in returning to work, you convinced her that your business travel made her employment impractical. Family stability was our priority. The children needed consistent parenting. Whose definition of stability? Patricia interjected. Objection, Jonathan said. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Carter replied. But I'll allow exploration of this topic. Mr. Coleman, did you ever support your ex-wife's independent career goals? Richard's composure began to crack slightly. I supported our family's goals. Sometimes individual desires need to be balanced against collective needs. Who determined what those collective needs were? We discussed these decisions together. Mrs. Martinez, Judge Carter turned to Diane. Did you feel your individual career goals were balanced against family needs or subordinated to them? Diane chose her words carefully. Your Honor, every time I expressed interest in independence returning to work, managing my own finances, making decisions about our children, Richard found generous ways to make those options impractical. I began to understand that his support always came with conditions that ensured his control. Can you give me a specific example? When the children were 5, I wanted to return to marketing. Richard offered to pay for a nanny so I wouldn't worry about childcare. But the nanny would report to him about the children's activities, creating a situation where I'd be monitored in my own home while supposedly pursuing independence. Judge Carter made detailed notes. Ms. Wells, you're not a party to this proceeding, but you were present during the incident that precipitated this hearing. Would you like to address the court? Amber stood, her pregnancy now clearly visible at 7 months. Your Honor, I care deeply about Sophia and Lucas. They've been with us 4 days a week for months, and I see how they worry about their mother's financial struggles. When I suggested they might be happier with more stability, Mrs. Martinez became violent. What specifically did you say to Mrs. Martinez? Amber hesitated. I told her that Richard could petition for full custody if her behavior continued to be problematic. You threatened her with loss of custody. I was explaining the reality of the situation. Judge Carter's expression sharpened. Ms. Wells, what is your background in family law? I don't have legal training, but Richard explained. So you made threats about custody proceedings based on your boyfriend's interpretation of family law. It wasn't a threat. It was a threat, Judge Carter said firmly. And it was delivered by someone with no legal authority during a conversation about medical decisions for children who aren't your legal responsibility. The courtroom fell silent. Richard's carefully constructed narrative was unraveling under judicial scrutiny. Mrs. Martinez, Judge Carter continued, you struck Ms. Wells during this conversation? Yes, Your Honor. After she told me my children might be happier without me and threatened custody proceedings, I lost my temper. I was wrong to hit her. And Ms. Wells, you bit Mrs. Martinez hard enough to require emergency room treatment. She attacked me. I was protecting my unborn child. By biting someone's ear, I wasn't thinking clearly. Judge Carter reviewed her notes for several long minutes while the courtroom waited in tense silence. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen every variation of family manipulation. Mr. Coleman, your pattern of behavior suggests a systematic attempt to undermine the mother-child relationship through financial leverage. Ms. Wells, your involvement in custody discussions exceeds appropriate boundaries. Mrs. Martinez, while your physical response was inappropriate, it occurred during a conversation where you were being threatened with loss of your children? She paused, looking at each party in turn. Here's what's going to happen. Mr. Coleman, your emergency petition is denied. Furthermore, until you complete court-mandated co-parenting classes, your visitation will be supervised. Ms. Wells, you are prohibited from involvement in custody exchanges or parenting decisions. Mrs. Martinez, you will attend anger management counseling, but your custody remains unchanged. The gavel came down not with finality, but with the promise of justice. Richard's money had finally met its match, a judge who understood that the best interests of children couldn't be purchased through charitable donations or legal maneuvering. As they left the courtroom, Richard attempted one final negotiation in the hallway. Diane, this doesn't have to be adversarial. I can still help with the medical bills, with better housing for the children. Richard, Diane interrupted, for 20 years I thought your money meant you cared. Now I understand you were buying compliance, not providing love. The hallway echoed with their footsteps as they walked in opposite directions, carrying the pieces of a family that money couldn't repair. 6 months later, Diane sat in the coffee shop where she'd first met Patricia Wong, reviewing marketing proposals for the Women's Legal Aid Society while her laptop displayed the spreadsheet of her newly independent finances. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was now earning money by helping other women navigate the same battles she'd fought. The twins were thriving in their new routine. Richard's court-mandated parenting classes had forced him to focus on emotional availability rather than financial solutions, and his interactions with the children had gradually improved. Supervised visitation had initially wounded his pride, but it had taught him that his children needed his presence, not his presence. Mommy, Mrs. Torres says you're famous now, Sophia announced, sliding into the booth beside her with artwork from school. Famous is a strong word. Sweetheart, I just help other families sometimes, like how Patricia helped us. Exactly like that. Lucas climbed in on the other side, carrying his soccer cleats and a juice box. Dad says Amber's baby might come early. Can babies choose when they want to be born? Sometimes babies surprise everyone, Diane said, closing her laptop to focus on her children. How do you feel about having a baby brother or sister? Confused, Sophia said with 8-year-old honesty. It's like having two families, but not really. Different doesn't mean wrong, Diane reminded her. Families come in all shapes and sizes. Maria appeared at their table, still wearing scrubs from her shift at the pediatric clinic. Sorry I'm late. How was school? We learned about strong women in history, Lucas said. Sophia wrote about Mommy for her report. Did she now? Maria smiled at her niece. What did you write? I wrote about how sometimes strong women have to fight for what's right, even when it's scary, Sophia said, and how my mom taught me that some things aren't for sale. Diane felt tears prick her eyes, recognizing her own words reflected back through her daughter's understanding. Her phone buzzed with a text from Patricia. New client consultation tomorrow. Similar pattern to your case. Are you available to consult? Diane typed back, of course. Over the past 6 months, she'd become Patricia's unofficial consultant on cases involving financial manipulation and custody disputes. Her marketing background helped her identify the patterns of narrative control that wealthy ex-spouses use to justify their behavior. Another case, Maria asked, reading over her shoulder. Another woman who's discovering that her ex-husband's generosity came with conditions she never understood. Are you glad you fought it? Diane looked at her children, who were arguing good-naturedly about whether juice boxes counted as healthy snacks. Then at her sister, who'd supported her through the worst period of her life. Then at her laptop displaying a bank account that was modest but entirely her own. I'm glad I learned the difference between being taken care of and being controlled, she said finally. Her phone rang, and Richard's name appeared on the screen. Their conversations had become civil, even occasionally warm, as they learned to co-parent without the undertones of financial coercion that had characterized their marriage. Hi, Richard. Hi. Quick question. Sophia mentioned she needs poster board for a science project. Should I pick it up, or do you want to handle it? The question was simple, but it represented months of progress. Richard was learning to ask rather than assume, to coordinate rather than control. I can get it tomorrow, Diane said. But thanks for checking. Also, Amber wanted me to ask. She's been attending her prenatal classes, and they have a session about blended families. She wondered if you'd be open to participating. No pressure, but the instructor thinks it might help everyone adjust. 6 months ago, the suggestion would have felt like another manipulation. Now it sounded like genuine attempt at cooperation. Let me think about it, Diane said. Of course. And Diane, thank you for being flexible about this weekend. I know my schedule changes are inconvenient sometimes. After he hung up, Diane reflected on how much had changed. Richard was learning that his children needed emotional availability, not financial advantages. Amber was discovering that meaningful relationships required equality, not dependence. And Diane was building a life that couldn't be bought, threatened, or negotiated away. Are you happy, Mommy? Lucas asked, looking up from his juice box. The question was simple but profound. Coming from a child who'd watched his family reorganize itself around new definitions of security and love, Diane considered her answer carefully. 6 months ago, she would have equated happiness with the absence of conflict, with financial stability, with keeping everyone satisfied. Now she understood that happiness was more complex and more durable than temporary peace. I'm content, she said finally, which is different from happy, but better in some ways. What's the difference? Sophia asked, genuinely curious. Happy is a feeling that comes and goes. Content is knowing that you're living the right way, even when things are difficult. Maria smiled at her sister's wisdom. That's very philosophical for a Friday afternoon. Mrs. Torres says philosophy is just thinking about important things, Lucas contributed. She's teaching us about different kinds of families in social studies. What did you learn? That families are about who takes care of you and who you take care of back, Sophia said. Not about who has the most money or the biggest house. The insight came with the clarity that children often brought to adult complications. Diane realized her daughter had absorbed the most important lesson from their family's transformation, that authentic relationships couldn't be purchased or negotiated. Her phone buzzed with another text, this time from a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Martinez, this is Jennifer Kim from Dr. Phillips's office. Dr. Phillips wanted me to reach out about Sophia's follow-up appointment for her respiratory evaluation. Diane stared at the message, feeling a familiar spike of anxiety. Then she remembered that she no longer had to navigate these situations alone. She forwarded the text to Patricia with a note. Thought you should see this. 6 months later, still trying to create medical emergencies? Patricia's response came immediately. Screenshot everything. Forward to Judge Carter's office. This violates the court order about medical consultations. The exchange reminded Diane how much her circumstances had changed. 6 months ago, a message like this would have sent her spiraling into self-doubt and fear. Now it was simply evidence of ongoing behavior that the court needed to monitor. Trouble? Maria asked, noticing her expression. Just Richard's ecosystem still trying to create problems that require his solutions? Diane said. But now I have an ecosystem too. Women supporting women, Sophia said, parroting a phrase she'd heard frequently in recent months. Exactly. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Diane reflected on how different her life looked now. Her apartment was still small, her car still old, her bank account still modest compared to Richard's resources. But she owned her choices now, and that ownership had transformed everything else. Her children were learning to value emotional authenticity over material comfort. Richard was discovering that his greatest gift to his children was his genuine presence, not his financial provision. Even Amber was finding her own voice, gradually establishing independence as her pregnancy progressed and her yoga studio became self-sustaining. Mommy, Lucas said as they walked to the car. When I grow up, I want to be like you. What do you mean we're brave enough to do the right thing even when it's scary? Diane stopped walking, overwhelmed by the realization that her children had watched her transformation and learned its lessons. They'd seen her choose dignity over security, truth over convenience, independence over comfort. Most importantly, they'd learned that some things integrity, self-respect, authentic love truly weren't for sale. Thank you, sweetheart, she said, pulling both children into a hug. That's the best compliment anyone has ever given me. As they drove home through the Los Angeles traffic, Diane's phone buzzed with a final message of the day. This one was from a woman named Sarah Coleman, Richard's first wife. I heard about your custody case through mutual friends. I wanted you to know that I'm proud of you for fighting. I didn't have the courage 20 years ago, but watching you has inspired me to finally tell my story. Would you be interested in coffee sometime? Diane smiled, recognizing the ripple effects of choosing courage over compliance. Her battle with Richard hadn't just protected her own children, it had created permission for other women to examine their own situations and make different choices. The fight had been worth it, not because she'd won in any traditional sense, but because she discovered something more valuable than victory, the knowledge that her dignity wasn't negotiable, her children's love wasn't conditional, and her future wasn't for sale. As they pulled into their apartment complex, Sophia looked up from her art project and said, Mommy, I'm glad we live here. Even though it's small, because it's ours, Sophia said simply, nobody can take it away or change the rules. Diane parked the car and sat for a moment, listening to her children's chatter and feeling the weight of authentic contentment. Richard's money had bought many things over the years: luxury, convenience, social status, temporary peace. But it had never bought what she'd found in that small apartment, the irreplaceable security of owning her own choices. The golden bars of her former cage had been beautiful, but they'd still been bars. Freedom, she'd learned, wasn't about having the most resources, it was about having the right to say no to arrangements that diminished your humanity. And that freedom, finally, was priceless.